All right. As people come on in and have a good old time, we're just gonna do a quick little intro here, back and forth. Ethan, if you could just like go ahead and just tell me kind of what you do, where you are, why you care about data, dashboards, and everything in between. So that's the open-ended prompt to start us off with real pointed data collection here.
I love it. So I'll give you a tiny bit of history. So I was at a small startup and I was building dashboards. It wasn't my primary job, but part of my job, I was building dashboards, taking data from a read replica of a database, building charts to run our business. We got acquired by LiveRamp, did some other jobs, and I looked around and was like, why does LiveRamp not have a data team? So wrote the job description to become the head of business intelligence or head of analytics at LiveRamp and put in place our modern data stack. And as part of that, I was also interviewing all the execs. Like, what do they care about? What's important? You're talking 1,000-person, effectively publicly traded company. It was a subsidiary of a publicly traded company at the time. So have seen this at small scale, large scale. And then I worked in corp dev and M&A in the data world before starting Portable about 4 years ago. And the problem we set out to solve with Portable is when you look around at all the data integration tools, the people that pull data from applications and systems and put it in data warehouses, they all have the same 200 integrations. It's Postgres, Salesforce, Marketo, et cetera. And the problem is if you want data from other tools, or if you want one tool that has all the integrations, it doesn't exist. So we set out 4 years ago to focus on how do you build 10,000 integrations. We aren't there yet, but we're at about 1,300. And we have a path to get to 10,000. So the way to think about us is we're a ELT tool. We extract data from business applications and put it in data warehouses, either for systems that you can't find a connector to anywhere else on the market, or for more common systems like Klaviyo, Pendo, HubSpot, et cetera. In those ones, it's typically either a support, reliability, or cost consideration that drives someone to Portable over other solutions. So all I do is build and maintain integrations and also use data internally to run our business. So excited for the conversation.
Yeah, awesome. And then for everybody who's curious who the heck I am, who came over from Ethan, I'm JJ Reynolds, founder over at Vision Labs. We're like a marketing data agency. So we work with teams to integrate data from various sources, build out reporting that like makes sense. I think the main thing that we're known for is kind of building dashboards that make sense to everybody involved. That's really what we're known for, and people really come to us and refer us very often when say, hey, we need to make these reports super actionable for our teams. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through, I have slides here, everybody. So we're going to hop into some slides. Ethan, as we have questions, or if you think, hey, I think this is applicable, or if you have clarifying things, let's hop into it and we can have some little bespoke offshoot conversations as it goes. So that's the plan here, folks. And if anybody has any questions as like we run through, just drop it in the chat. We can like answer those as need be, whether that's tech related, whether that's marketing related, whether that's reporting related. I think between the two of us, we can answer a lot of questions here. So let's hop into it, folks. So I'm calling this the minimum viable dashboard because honestly, 95% of the reports that we see out there have too many numbers on them. No one knows what to do with the numbers, and the goal is simplicity. If you can simplify that, it becomes much easier to act. There's a quote that I'm going to misattribute. Let's go with Ronald Reagan. I'm just kidding. Let's go with somebody out there. I would have made it simpler, but I didn't have enough time. Right? Like I would have made it simpler, but I did not have enough time is something that keeps happening. So basically what I'm going to do is remove everything except for the action as much as possible. Here's me at my wedding, which is just over a year ago. So that's the best I'll ever look. I'm going to use it. I'm wearing that same shirt right now. So there's my like fun fact. I'm in Reno, Nevada over at Vision Labs. We serve as a measurement department. So we bolt on kind of on a recurring basis to manage all of these. Our clients range on the low end from 5 million, high end 250, kind of in that like mid-market, I guess, for depending on what size you think. We do work with everything under the sun. So B2B, B2C, SaaS, direct response, e-com, content. We have clients on every aspect. So the business model aspect of things, we are really, really comfortable with building reporting. We work in the Google stack. I know, Ethan, you guys work in like kind of all the stacks, but we work with like mostly BigQuery, mostly Looker Studio, kind of GA4 on the like marketing acquisition side of things there. So totally honest. If you guys have questions, visionlabs.com/content, since we're here, there we go. So why do your dashboards end up like this? Where you have a lot of data, a lot of numbers, and no one knows what to do. And Ethan, I'm going to ask you, like, why do you think, like, I'm sure you've seen a lot of dashboards out there. Like, why do you think that reports end up with more numbers and everyone's like, what the heck? Like, why do you think that happens fundamentally in an organization?
I think it comes down to really one thing, which is the data person. And that could be, it could be a data engineer, data analyst, analytics engineer, whoever, whatever that you want to call them, head of data, is unable to put themselves into the shoes, like mentally, like step back, stop being a data person for a minute and put themselves into the shoes of a marketing person or of an HR leader or of a sales leader or of a CEO, and think about, as a CMO, do I really care about the like RPM meter thing in red, yellow, green, or do I care about which of our ad campaigns are wasting me money? Like you have to figure out, put yourself in their shoes and think about, what do they actually care about every day? And they probably honestly have a spreadsheet or an email or something that's going to them that is a good actionable representation of the world. And a lot of data teams think they're always right. And they think that whether it's pie charts or bar charts or whatever, tell the right story. You can't think about the narrative through your own perspective as a data person. You have to think about the narrative through the lens of the business person who actually is going to do something with the information. So like, I think that is the most important thing of all of this, is don't think about it as a data deliverable. Think about it as, if you tomorrow were tasked with working inside of a marketing department to optimize your landing pages for SEO, what are you actually going to do with the data? What are the things that you're going to do next? And only talk about those. Make it super, super clear what those are. That's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal here. Is like, I think in general, right? You hit on this perfectly, and we didn't even rehearse it beforehand. Everybody is like, there's no action, right? Like your RPM meters in the red. Like, what do you do with that? Like the CMO person's like, okay, let's just multiply it by ×2 and we're good to go. Like, so no one knows what to do with that, and everyone just asks me, like, that's either the spreadsheet or like the person of the data. Like, if you're the kind of data person, like someone's just asking you bespoke questions, and you're like, we have a dashboard for that, and then they're like, what's the number? How many sales did we have on January 17th? And you're like, there's a line chart that I built that like says this, right? And then the other thing that I see oftentimes is people just checking boxes. Like, we have to have this report because we have to have this report. At the core of it, there's too much data, right? There's too much numbers. There's too many things that like are existing that do not really matter. The big problem in general, I like to put it, I call it the complexity to time ratio matrix. We can use a bigger word if we want to sound smarter. But at the core of it is that over time, the ease of creating dashboards and getting data has become easier, right? Like now, even like portable, right? Like we use you guys for Keep, like, for example. That is a nightmare to build by yourself. We've done it. It sucks, but it's easier, right? And so dashboards and the BI and everything else is like really becoming easier to do. At the same time, the volume of data is increasing, right? We've got more ad platforms, we've got more like internal servers, we've got more whatever the heck else that we're doing, and that volume of data is increasing in complexity over time. What happens is that the readability of your dashboard just goes off the complexity chart. You've got now charts and hover and click states and button interactions, and now you're like, oh, in order to get that, click on these 7 things and then divide by 6, and now you're off to the races. So at its core fundamentals, the goal here is that when we take this red line and make our readability easier, and that will in turn make the actionability easier of that. So, we got the same thing happen again. So, okay, I must have copied this. There we go. So the easiest way to combat this is going to be following this little framework that we have. We use this internally. We build a lot of dashboards, a lot of reports, and talk to a lot of teams. All these examples are in Looker Studio, but you can apply them to BI, like whatever tool. I don't care. They all do the same thing. Don't get me started on that. Okay. Yep. I'm going to call this the minimum viable dashboard framework. All right. So this is it. We're going to identify what is important. That's by like talking to people. We're going to get the data fast, right? So that's the next thing. We could get really stuck in like pipelining stuff out for 3 months. Like, go to the thing, download a spreadsheet. We're going to ask our buy questions. This is by far the most important thing, so you don't end up with a lot of data. Figure out the granularity. build a hypothetical outcome, find the gap, simplify visual clutter, and then go back to step one. And so I'm going to run through this very like quickly here at a bespoke. We're going to have some little conversations around this, but this is fundamentally what, if you do this predictably, every single time someone asks a question of you, it will make your life way easier. Let's go with one metric. Okay, so everyone who's here, I don't care which vertical you're in, what you do, like drop a metric that you think is important. Okay, just in the chat, think of it in your head. Like you can go with like, and I just don't use revenue because revenue is always important. I'm going to take that cop out there, but pick any metric you want. It could be uptime. It could be new leads. It could be number of page views. I don't care. Pick a metric, right? And I'm going to use our website here just for the sake of simplicity. So it's going to be marketing related. Boom, new contacts, net new contacts that we've got on the page. Ta-da, all the data is gone. We now have new contacts from October Q4 of 2023. There's the date right in the top.
JJ, I got a question for you. I also saw Dina putting conversion rate down there.
Yeah.
I find it really difficult to talk to business stakeholders about a metric. So it's like, if you even think about it as like, great, new contacts is important. The way I tend to think about this, and even conversion rate, it's like, there's a lot of different conversion rates in a product, but it's like, to a certain extent, there's two things that someone could be trying to do with having more contacts or improving a conversion rate. It's either make a decision about whether to reallocate resources somehow or to get more contacts, or automate away a task in that process. But it's like, how do you, before you even got here to new contacts, like when you're talking to a business stakeholder, do you find yourself going to them being like, give me a metric that matters? Or how do you have a conversation with a CMO or a CRO about actually identifying what matters? Because I found it really difficult to talk in terms of metrics and dimensions and charts and whatever. What is your biggest problem right now? Like, and a lot of marketers would be like, we need more leads. Like we need more people at the top of our funnel, which is the same thing as saying we need more contacts. But in their speak, it is the top of funnel is 1,152 over the course of the last 12 months. We need to double that. We need twice as many people coming in every month, but it's you need to speak in their language. I'm kind of curious what you see works and what doesn't.
Yeah, usually like we have something we call like the foresight system, where basically it's kind of like a dumbbell approach where you grab on one side is the bottom metric. So like revenue is usually it for most, revenue or profit if you want to get really spicy with things. And then on the other side, you have like impressions on like a platform, right? Like that's like the most, like Facebook ad impressions is like the most non-related to revenue, right? And what we try to do is be like, okay, we start at a metric, which we call a metric, but like they call a KPI or whatever else. And then we try to see what things influence it. And at what like granularity do we need to know, like, hey, are we going to change this thing? Are we trying to change this? Are we like, is new contacts of 1,152 good or bad? And we try to like dissect of like what their thought process is when they see a number. And then we try to put that onto a report so that they can have that peace of mind of like, this thing is what I'm trying to influence. Here's the influence levers I'm pulling, like whether it's ads or content or SEO or CO, right? And are those levers being like moving this number up or down over the time period that we think it's going to happen? That's usually our approach, is where we try to like really understand what they're thinking about. We have a lot of this, like, because we're an agency, we touch a lot of things. Like we have a lot of this baked in of like, we know what they need, not what they want, right? Kind of thing of like, hey, we know what you need. So we try to educate them around why this is important. Like, why do you need your new customer acquisition cost, right? Not necessarily customer acquisition cost, but like your NCAC. Why is that the better metric to look at than this other thing? And that's how we approach it, is a lot more through education of like, we think that this is better for you. So kind of a little bit of a cop out, because we can do more as opposed to like, because we're a third party, as opposed to if you're in-house team or whatever else, like it's not as easy to be that blunt. So I sympathize with you if you're anyone who's listening who's in that.
The only thing that's interesting about that to me is like, before you even get started thinking about new contacts as the problem, what I find to be useful is you do kind of need high level metrics for the entire funnel. Let's say, so like we're a PLG company, like to your, like we create connectors create pages on our website create impressions and clicks. Those clicks turn into signups. Those signups convert via conversion rate into free trials. Those free trials convert into paying customers. Those paying customers either move on to a higher price tier or churn, or just keep doing what they're doing. So it's like, in order for me to know as the CEO, not as the data person, as the CEO, what matters, I first need to know the whole process. Like I need to have mapped out, here's what's going on, so I can look and be like, oh, like the place for us to, like, if we can increase our conversion rate from sign up to trial by 2x, it'll 2x our revenue. If we can like increase the number of impressions we bring in, we'll have to see, but like it could double our, so it's one of those things where before, like I always try and tell data teams to take even more steps back and just make sure they're focused on the right problem first. And I think even if you just download them all from spreadsheets or manually put it into spreadsheets, it's like getting a high level sense of the entire process and making sure that you're digging into the easiest problem to solve that'll have the highest impact, allows you to then focus on the right stuff. Because if you pick the wrong place to optimize a metric and you realize that your the conversion rate you're trying to optimize, even if it's 100%, you're not going to double your revenue. Like, don't spend your time there. Spend your time on something else. So that's like the other thing I would just.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's like the point that I'm about to make right here is around, once you have these numbers, right? Like whatever numbers they are, like mapping out your funnel of things, like the granularity that you then look at of that makes the ability for you to optimize or improve, like whether you have a like PLG style thing of like signups to payments to upgrades, etc. Like, do you need to know that over a longer period of time, or like daily doesn't make a difference, right? Like it's like, oh, hey, every day, like we had 0, we're not going to go shut everything down, we're going bankrupt because no one signed up on a Saturday afternoon, right? Like that's not the case. So that's like right here. So if we make new contacts, like just as an example, right, of like saying, hey, we picked a metric, we have 5 metrics of you can just take revenue, for example, of like, say you use revenue as your metric here. You've now defined a metric that's important to the business, but the next thing you're going to do is, exactly to your point, is get the data really fast so that you can test out your hypothesis around like, is this important? And so the easiest way to do that is to export it manually. There's visual connectors depending on like what you're doing. Lastly, I would say like do this last is like use a database like BigQuery, whatever else, because it's going to be, unless you really know what you're doing, it's going to be harder to do that and you're going to be run into more problems. Whereas just go download the thing, do it from last year and like do that first, right? So if you get the data really fast, you kind of cut down on the time that you need to like iterate on the actual like boring part of like writing SQL or creating the joins or everything else. Like you just downloaded the thing. It's like endpoints don't make a difference. You're like, I want these 7 fields from the UI, export.
Yep.
Don't ask the question about how complicated that is to build from your data team. Just like export it and then go for it.
Yeah. Do you have super hard in here too, or is this the last one? Because the other one's like real time. And it's one of those things where I think as you start at the top, export manually to medium to hard to really hard, it's like there are scenarios where you need BigQuery, and there are scenarios where you need real-time data pipelines, but you need to know that that's the level of granularity you need to be at. Like you need midday data or like you need real-time data to actually justify the investment. I was talking to someone recently about Portable. They came to us being like, hey, I need to get my data from Buildium, which is a property management system, into QuickBooks. We can't yet connect systems directly to each other, but I told him, I was like, if you're putting into QuickBooks, it's probably for monthly or quarterly reporting. Like this doesn't need to be automated every day. So like we could take the data out of Buildium every day, sync it into a Google Sheet. You could create some VLOOKUPs that get the data into the format you need to import them into QuickBooks. And once a week or once a month, you can manually upload them to QuickBooks. The amount of time and money it's going to take for you to just manually just go into QuickBooks and say, import this spreadsheet, which is 3 minutes of time.
Yeah.
If you have to do that once a quarter or once a month, that's trivial. If you come back and like, I need this data every single day for invoicing out of QuickBooks, very different. But you have to know the granularity first.
And that's exactly kind of like the next point here is like when I see these buy questions is like, what do you need this data broken down by? Right? Like you have your number of revenue or whatever it might be out of those platforms. Like you now have periods, right? That's like one thing where it's like, hey, we took new contacts, we broke it down by previous period, right? You might have previous year, right? Now the problem that people don't realize is that you took one metric, right? And now you have three metrics. Like you have one number, now you have three. Um, so if you ask buy questions, like here's to your point, Ethan, of like date is as a metric, like you could break it down by date where you have like hour, day, week, month. Do you need it by every hour? Do you need it by every minute? Like, do you need it by the day of the week? Like, do we have to have, is this a Sunday or the first of the month? Like, those are two different types of questions. But then you could also, like, from a business stakeholder perspective, kind of to your point here, it's like, do we need to know where they came from, right? Like the entry point into our system. Did they download a PDF for this, or did they start a trial? Like those are two different things that, like, if you just have new contacts, like from a PLG style company, is like, are they in our product, or did they download a PDF, or did they join a webinar? Like those are three different things that we might need to know and break our new contacts broken down by. And so like these buy questions are like really helpful to, especially if you're interviewing someone or talking to a stakeholder or talking to somebody else, is like, we now have a way to kind of have this relationship between a really like techie person of like, do we need dimensions and metrics, and like, oh, we need to reaggregate this by the whatever. Like, no CMO cares, no marketing director cares.
Yeah.
But then like you could say like, oh, would it be helpful to have the revenue? Like we've done $20 million forever. Like that's the number. Like $20 million. We've done $20 million revenue in the history of the business. Do we need that broken down by quarter? Like, do we need that broken down by month? Like what would be helpful to have that number broken down by? Because revenue by default is all-time revenue.
Yep. So a
And
couple things.
yeah.
So Claudio commented, like, how do you summarize these buy questions and the things that'll move the needle, and then how do you break them down, et cetera. I think if you've been in data long enough, you can start to have a sense of what to look at, like make some hypotheses, and then validate or just like unvalidate them, disprove them pretty quickly. But it's, in my opinion, it's a lot easier than that. So this is a phenomenal place to use two things. One, ChatGPT or Gemini or any of this type of stuff, where you go and be like, hey, I'm trying to increase like the number of signups to my website. Can you give me 10 things that I might want to try, and use it as a way of identifying the buy questions? The other one that is my go-to is, if I don't know about a topic, and there's a lot of topics in the data world that I do not know. It could be anything from like, I'm actually know SEO pretty well, but it's like, let's say I'm trying to get up to speed on SEO. It's like, great, we have signups. How would I improve that through SEO? The first place I go when I'm trying to brainstorm what are the valuable buy questions, how should I break down my SEO dashboards, is I will go to Google image search, not Google search, Google image search, and I will search for an SEO dashboard. Because if you look for like SEO dashboard screenshots, or if we're trying to look at like e-commerce sales screenshots, e-commerce sales dashboard screenshots, you would be amazed at how easy it is to find dashboards that someone else has built where they already were able to come up with a scaffold for how to think about the levers that then influence revenue, or then influence your SEO traffic, or then influence talent retention. So depending on what it is you're trying to do, if you don't know anything about it, the easiest hack, in my opinion, is just start searching for products that have already solved that, like R&D teams, like product teams that have built those capabilities into their product, because someone out there in the e-commerce world has already thought about whatever conversion rate or point in the funnel that you're trying to optimize, and they built an entire product around it with all the drop downs and stuff. You don't need to recreate the entire thing, but if you go see how they thought about the problem, you can then come back to what JJ's got up here on the board and be like, for our company, yeah, we have these 10 options that we got from AI and from some screenshots online. These are the three we're going to start with. And it doesn't matter how much you know about that realm. Like, you can learn really fast. So like that's my hack for a lot of this stuff.
And also to level that up is like, if you don't know what to do with the number, like, does someone else? Like, that's a great like a great like quick like mental hack of like, oh, is this a bad number or a good number? And like, what would I do if I was to be this person? Like, if you can get into that mindset, you become like a weapon of like in the data world, because most people just are like, oh yeah, it's 2%. And you're like, cool. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go on with my life. But if you're like just the like moving from the like sales page to the checkout is 2%, like what probably should happen is we adjust our messaging on the sales page because 2% seems really low, and that's probably a good idea. And like maybe we just have a mismatch of like marketing to the pages thing, and they don't understand what they're signing up for. Right? If you can get into that mindset, whoo, you're spicy and dangerous. So that's kind of like a two-sided approach there.
If you also want to go one step further, by the way, if you're on like to your point, JJ, you're on a sales page and you're trying to convert to signups, you can go look at analytics dashboards and screenshots and ask questions. The other thing that you should not feel when I think about being a data person, I think about it's my problem to like it's my job to solve the problem. It's not my job to like try and put some stuff on a dashboard for it to be someone else's solution. It's like I need to solve the problem. How do I figure out how to improve that number? And I like in that scenario, I would also go look up vendors. I would go look up who sells solutions to optimize landing page conversions and go to their websites and click get a demo, get a demo, get a demo. Sign up for 5 demos in 24 hours. You will literally get them all done in 2.5 hours, if that. And go to those people and say, hey, here's our, like, this is where we are today. Like right now, we have this many people coming to our website every day. This is how many are actually converting. Is that great? Is it bad? Is it good? What would you do to improve this? And there's some salesperson on the other side of that line whose full-time job is to explain why like what the benchmark is. Are you below it? And if you're below it, what you can do to improve. Maybe it makes sense for you to then buy that tool. If it makes sense, it makes sense. If not, at least you now know how to think about the problem through the lens of a company who has literally spent millions and millions of dollars only on that problem. And
that happens to us quite a bit. Like that happens where like people come to us and like we have all this data and all this stuff, but like nobody knows what to do with it. And like like that happens to us quite often, probably like once a week almost, or every other week, where someone books a demo with or books a call with me and is like, I am running this like marketing team or marketing, and like we don't even have like a solid way to report on this thing. Like, how do you guys do it? And that's like that is a hack right there, Ethan. I've never even thought of that, like booking a bunch of demos at once of softwares or agencies and just see what happens.
Yeah. But like it's a hack, but it's like you also shouldn't feel bad about it because there is a very real world where that solution then becomes a way for you and your company to very quickly or over time manage the actual action of improving that conversion metric. Exactly. And you are a qualified buyer. It might not be your credit card that's going down for that product, but if you look at it and you're like, this is actually a great tool for the problem we have, and we do have a problem here. They want to pitch you on their solution. They want to educate you.
And like on that exact note, right? Like that's where these buy questions of granularity really come into play, right? Do you need to know revenue by day, right? Do you need to know it by week? Like, do you need to know it by week versus previous week? And this is where things like start to get really complex. And you can overwhelm people really quickly. And that's where I think that the dashboard screenshots really help, because we took this one metric, right, of new contacts. You could take revenue, you could take whatever your heart desires. We have new contacts. We now have the previous period, the previous year. We have it trended. So there's 6 different data points. We're at 10. We've got 16. So another 6 down below. So like we've taken one number and taken it and extrapolated it out into like 20 different numbers on a page. And so just want to be wary of like when you start building out reporting, like what are you doing this for, right? And so here another example, right? We have it by lead, like new contacts by lead. You might have this internally, or you might have it by the source where they came from versus the previous period. Are you trending up or down? And that way you can ask your buy questions that you try to tie them back to action, right? Are we trying to do something? And like, what does that actually like turn into? And then to Ethan, your next point, the granularity, right? This is like where I think a lot of people get stuck, especially at bigger companies, of like, do you have it by time of like year, half year, quarter, month, week, day, hour, minute? Like, do you need, like, what do you need these for? Right? Like, that's the thing that it's so funny to me. It happens all the time. We're like, we need this updated hourly. And I'm like, no one cares. Like, everyone's looking at yesterday. Like, let's just updated at 6 a.m. once. And we like, it just blows my mind how often that's the case of like, we need this every hour. And I'm sure you get this a lot at Portable, right? Like, I'm sure people are like, we need this every minute, every hour. Does that happen a bit to you?
So we deal with really not great APIs in a lot of scenarios, where it's like there are scenarios where a data flow can take over 24 hours to get data out of the system. And there might just not be an answer to that. And then there's other scenarios where people are like, it takes 20 minutes for me to get my data out. Can you do it in real time? And I'm looking, being like, you do realize you run this every 24 hours, right? So like, even if I do this, even if I extract the data in 10 seconds, you're only running this once a day. It's immediately going to be out of date for 23 more hours. And you probably don't care. So like, on our side, when I think about our own metrics that we use internally, it's like, if you think about SEO or LinkedIn or whatever as channels, they don't move quickly. It's not going to be intraday data. Like Google Search Console data is on a 3-day lag anyway. So like it's not it's not a speed game. The thing on our side that is the most important to be fast is, one of our key metrics is failures. It's how many flows are actively failing at any given point in time and how long have they been failing for. That is the one where that's an intraday metric. That is a, hey, like JJ just ran a data flow and it failed, and I need to know it like now.
And that's a perfect case scenario, right? Like you took that number of failures, and like, because you're like smart, you did it like automatically of like, oh, I need to have that by like thing, but you also have to have it like broken down by client or by user, right? Like you need to have that granularity. You can't be like, oh, we had 10 fail today, don't know who they were. Like I don't know. Like we're gonna figure it out, but that might be like,
if you look at failures in aggregate over a 12-month period, what am I going to do with that? Like, sure, we but if you tell me within the last 7 days, here's everything that has failed, or within the like in ordered by the thing that failed last, it's like I can see exactly where I need to spend my time. And for the real time stuff, it's like a lot of scenarios, that's all I need. Like I also don't need a very big deep dive into that data. I just need to know this is a problem right now, and then I go into my ticketing system and I just talk to the customer, or I troubleshoot the problems, where it's like a lot of the other stuff we look at, like CRM systems, revenue, like if like our revenue data from Stripe updates every 15 minutes. I honestly think it's a bad idea for that to be happening, because like credit cards fail. I'm seeing a revenue number that goes up and down by like $2,000 to $5,000 on a given day based on whether or not someone's credit card worked for the day. And it's like, I actually think it's a liability to do that. I think it shouldn't be updating midday, because I can't do anything about it. Like if their credit card failed, then I can actually do something about that. And I do have a tab in our KPI dashboard that is who owes us money. And it's just like, your credit card failed. Do you mind fixing it? But it's like, I don't need to know that every 15 minutes. I do right now. It's a waste of my mental energy to be looking at every 15 minutes.
Yeah. And so like you can take that same number, right, of like failures, right? You have all these things. Maybe it's something where you have like the failure, like percentage of like flows that have failed, right? And you trend that by month. So like our goal is that we're like decreasing this over time, especially if you hired like a full-time like DevOps person whose like goal is to like decrease this. I'm just making examples like for another thing, but like you could have all of these other things as well as like functions of like you also are breaking that data down. And a lot of people do this very intuitively, especially if you're like in the business world, right? Like you already broke it down, like who owes us money, but like by default, someone's gonna be like, oh, we have $10,000 of past due invoices. But like, you kind of have to know who, like, is that 10 people or one person that owes? Like you have that broken down by the item that they probably bought, and then by the person, right? So like those are things that like business function people do automatically, but like there's a disconnect often when a data person talks to like a business ops person, and you're like, oh yeah, we have $10,000 in past due balances. Yesterday we had 5,000. You're like, cool, don't care. Like, who do we have to contact to get this moving? And that's something that like you need a way to do that, especially if it's things that are not as intuitive, right? Like this is like a very intuitive thing. You and I both own businesses where it's like, we obviously know that we need to break this down by this person. But when you're working at like a larger scale, sometimes people are like, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
The other thing there is, especially as we talk about how do we break things down, granularity by, you'll very rapidly end up with charts or tables or dashboards that say, revenue broken down by geography, broken down by whatever, broken down by whatever. And it's, first of all, unreadable. It's, second of all, not actionable. So like when I think about naming tabs on, so like the way I structure dashboards, I have alerts at the top, like failing data flows, open tickets, etc. Then I've got tabs, and it's like Great. Top of funnel. How many impressions, then signups, then conversion rate, then trials, then revenue, then who owes us money and whatever.
Yeah.
But inside of each of those, when I think about naming a table or naming a chart or naming a section of a dashboard, I don't think about naming it through what is on the chart or what's in the table. I think about naming it through why does someone actually care about this? It's like these people, like I will literally name a table. These people owe us money. Reach out to them and tell them their credit card doesn't work. Like that is the name of my that is the name of my table. Because like if someone sees that, they know exactly what's going on. Or it's like these flows are failing. Troubleshoot what is wrong.
That's
or,
so funny because we do the same thing. So like we have like a thing that we call like lead impressions, where basically people who saw your lead magnets when we work with like companies that have lots of lead magnets. And we've just recently renamed it to like people who saw your lead magnets because like lead impression doesn't mean anything to the majority of people. Like for a data person, it's nice because it's like the what happened, lead, what happened, impressed, right? It's a very easy metric, like in your like from a data side of things. And we have like lead aware, lead engaged, lead generated, and it's like very easy from that. But then like for the user, we rename it to like people who saw the lead magnet, people who stuck around in the lead magnet for at least 5 seconds, like people who became a lead. Like, and so it's like we've just recently started doing that because there's a disconnect, right, between the business ops and then like the data side of things there.
Yeah.
So.
And if you can't, the other thing is if you can't figure out what that human readable description is of like, here's the thing that you're going to do with this data. Like it's, or even it's like, hey, these are our bookings number month over month. As the CEO, you should know if this is going up or down. Like that, like as the CEO, like I'm not going to like today change my bookings number for the month, but it's like, I need to know if the upstream levers that we're pulling are actually impacting that number.
Yeah.
That chart exists because I just need to know. And it's like making that crystal clear of like, what is the point of the chart of the dashboard? If you can't describe that and you can't describe why someone should care or what they should do about it, and it's typically either have this information in your head as a leader or and as a measurement metric or do a thing. If you can't define one of those, delete it. Like there's no reason to do it.
Exactly. And it's usually easy to put it back if you already went through all the effort to get it there. Like that's my favorite thing to do is like you hide it and see who notices and then you see what happens from there. And so like to your point, right? Administrative is usually monthly and then you trend that over time, right? Like month over month. Managers are usually weekly, depending on, again, what you're looking at here. And then practitioners are usually daily if you're like in a thing pushing buttons. Unless it's like SEO or like other types of things. Like sometimes you don't want to touch things daily because it'll break something else. But then usually developers is where you get into the hours, minutes things because they're like, oh, hey, we have errors that are breaking something else. And usually developers are into like the hour minute scenario of like uptime per minute. Whereas the CEO, just bring us full circle to how we started this conversation, might not have that nuance.
The developer section here, there is a certain threshold at which you just send someone into an application. It's like, like it's if you end up there, there are some scenarios where you need to build a data product on top of it that needs to be real time and be able to actually get it in hours or minutes. Like I have a lot of places in our own internal reporting that say, this is going on. Click here to see the ticket in Zendesk. And
that's my favorite thing is a hyperlink in a dashboard is the most underutilized function.
And it's like, I don't need that data every minute. I just need to know that you can go somewhere and see the data every minute. And the support person's already in there anyway. Like they're not going to be in the KPI. They're not going to be in our macro dashboard looking at quarterly trends when they need to be figuring out how to close the next ticket. So yeah, I would figure out where it actually makes sense to stop.
And then here's like, for example, like here's an idea around like this is kind of our internal like top line dashboard from like an admin side of things. We have like it's kind of dummy data, but like you have new contacts, right? Discovery calls, new clients, sessions, form impressions, new customers, transactions, like new revenue, total revenue. All of these metrics, right, are like very high level. There's not a lot of broken down by here as like if it's not working it relies on the viewer to know what's like what was the intention, is this good or bad, like we're going up for the most part, but like what is the thing that you then have to ask next. And then this is the biggest thing, especially like in e-com. Like I think that's the biggest culprit of this, is that you then have to have these kind of broken down by something. Your sessions have to be broken down by landing pages, so you know what's generating the most traffic, and those have to be broken down by the source of where that traffic's coming from. And is that going up or down based off of the strategy that is being deployed, right? If you're deploying a strat, like we have 2 clients that are e-com, one heavy SEO play. Like I kid you not, they have a content team to reckon with to go after the like all the keywords around this product. We have another one, zero SEO, could not care. They don't have a blog. They don't have like there's not even content on the site. It is just products about the product and thing, but they run ads, 100% ad driven. If the ads turn off, their sales turn off, aside from like email marketing. And if those 2 dashboards are dramatically different,
Yep.
because the function of how they're doing things, even though they're the same vertical, remarkably different. So that's where like this looks really pretty about these scorecards here. And like this is applicable to everybody. But then the next granularity down is where you really start to tie business strategy to the actual reporting of what are we trying to do and what is the outcome we're intending for? And does that line up with our reporting so that I know what to do next?
Yep. The one, so like when I look at something like this, by the way, I wish I had a screenshot similar with the little arrows and things, but the way I typically look at this information is we use Retool internally for our own BI capabilities. Again, to your point earlier, they're all the same. Retool is just really cost effective, and we also use it for some other stuff. But I kind of think I use it through the lens of each of these is a tab in my dashboard. So I would have a tab which is signups by day, and I would say, or trailing 30 days of signups. So it's like over a time frame. Then I would have a conversion rate, to Dina's point, as the next tab, as something I can optimize. And then I would have how many discovery calls did we get over the last 30 days or from that cohort. Then I would say then conversion rate from discovery call to new customer, then conversion rate, and then transactions or bookings over the last 30 days. Because if you think about it, it's like your funnel, as a leader, you can look and be like, in the back of your head, you know what these numbers are, and you can click in and see how they trend over time. But it's like, I can be like, oh, over the last 30 days, we only got 8 signups by day. That's lower than it should be. Like, what's going on? Oh, but our conversion rate's higher. Like, maybe it's okay because we're actually targeting a better ICP. And then we got this many discovery calls. That's trending up. That's good to know. But the conversion rate from discovery calls to new customers is going down, like, because it's only 3%.
And that's and that's exactly the point, right? Like it's related to something else. Like every metric has a relation to something else. My favorite thing that happened, her story to tell, is one time this client of ours was doing like they're trying to go for like it was a nonprofit, and they're going for like new donations. They're trying to get new market share in donations. They hired a large agency that spent like buku bucks, like hundreds of thousands of dollars in ads, plus their fee of who knows what. And they reported a report of like, it was like a percentage increase. So it was like 1% increase of these things. And everyone's like, cool, increasing. But like half the team didn't know they spent $250,000 like to do that. And they're like, oh, we had an increase of 1%. And you're like, we mean to be increased by 10? Like we got 10 new people and we spent $250,000. But like that's where you have to have the relationships, right? Of like, what's the function of the business? And to your point, right, when you click into sessions, it's like, okay, we have revenue spent divided by, and you can have all these relationships a lot better. That's why you have dashboarding tools and not just a number on a page like you're seeing here. And but that's my favorite example of like, we spent $250,000. Not the entire team knew. Half the team was like, woo, we're up a percentage point. We're like, we invested more money than we spent all of year in the last month, and we're up 1%. Like
the other thing that's important to note about like conversion funnels is stuff at the top of the funnel. Even if you can influence it, a lot of times it like the more pages you have, the more whatever, they become lower value as you create more of them. So like you might be able to double the number of impressions, but it's not going to necessarily double the number of discovery calls. So like but if you can, it has the highest impact because it impacts your discovery calls metric, your customers metric, and your revenue metric. Whereas the other side of that is, and it depends on where you are in your life cycle and what your short-term and long-term goals are. But if you try and go to your existing customers and get more money out of them, and you've got 47 new customers. If you look at it and you're like, if this conversion rate if we doubled it or we tripled it,
Mm-hmm.
and it still doesn't hit your goal, you can't focus your time there. Like, you can focus some time there, but you can't assume that's going to be the answer. Like, you have to know what's a logical bound to get to. It's like new customer, like if your customer ACV is $10,000,
Yeah, ten thousand
and the
dollars.
only way to quadruple it is to go to $40,000, and you look at the market and you're just like, no way is anyone going to pay me $40,000 for what we have today. Don't waste your time trying to optimize that metric and that conversion rate. Be like, okay, great. In the background, we're going to do R&D work to improve, to build a new product that we can sell for 40 grand. In the short term, we need to go figure out how we're going to convert more discovery calls into customers, or more contacts into discovery calls, because those are going to be faster things. If you can double them, like, it'll flow through into all your other metrics. So
And some things are like a function of the vertical. I think that's my favorite like thing to talk about is like you're never going to get your average order value of your gum that you sell. I say gum because I have gum on of extra gum, not sponsored. Is not never going to be $1,000. So your average order value is never going to be $1,000 for gum unless you're like selling enterprise, right? But at the same time, if you sell jacuzzi tubs, your average order value is going to be in the thousands of dollars, but your lifetime value is going to be very low increase, right? Like it's
you're
a
never going to
function
sell
of the
jacuzzi
category.
to the same person, to the same household.
Yeah. And it's like a function of the category of like B2B. If you're doing enterprise, you're going to have higher deals, longer timelines. If you're in B2C, you're going to have like, it's all a function of that. So like to your point, you cannot over optimize something that isn't going to make a business either. It's not possible. If you figure out to sell that like $1,000 gum, that you've got a whole other business model to go for. And so that's kind of something that to always think about in the back of your head is like, is there a limit to this thing, or like should we stop pushing at some point on a certain metric? And that, to your point, is like, this is my favorite thing to talk with executives about, especially marketing leaders, is like hypothetical outcome-based actions, which is what you just mentioned, where you say, for example, and I call it like goal and inverse goal, and you get that from somebody else. Where I'm saying is like, you have to avoid this, where you say the dashboard and analyst person is like saying, what do you want? It's not that simple, right? They're like basically like you're like asking as the dashboard person, like, what do you want? And then the dashboard viewer is like, what am I supposed to do with this information? And then the dashboard developer is like, what do you want? And then you guys go back and forth, and you want to try to avoid that, like to what we've been talking about, to right now. And the easiest way I found to do that is where you have something where it's like, normally there's a metric, right? Like checkouts, right? For example. And that is in context of a bigger thing, but you oftentimes as like a developer or analyst or whatever else, like might not have that full context. And so like, you've got to do that investigation to then have like, okay, here's like the actual system flow of like, there's a checkout and there's a pop-out intent, and then there's an add to cart function, or they could go view the product, or they could close the window and then they could purchase, or they could view the product and then add to cart again and then purchase. And so if you can diagram this out, right, like what we've been talking about for like PLG or anything else, where you have this kind of like hypothetical outcome based of like, okay, our goal is 100 purchases, from that 10% add to cart or whatever else, like you can backfill the numbers in percentage wise in hypothetical. My favorite thing to do is write this down on a piece of paper, like, or like in a Miro board or whatever else you have, and be like, here's what this flow looks like. Okay. And then you can forecast out exactly what that looks like. And so you take something like this and you find the gap, right? So now you put numbers and you say, okay, landing page percentage to submit form is 40%. And then 60% of people do this, 60% of people do this. And you kind of just like pencil this in, right? Like you say, hey, like here's what we expect, like based off of my marketing knowledge as a CMO or whatever else. And what you can do is put that idea down on paper, and then you can avoid this, like, of what am I supposed to do, because the person who's in charge put this on paper. And then the last thing here is you can then say, go focus on this, because it's not at your, like you said this, and it's not that. So is that the intention? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Ethan, of like putting this on paper and then saying we expected 40%, we're at 20%. So you know what to do, right?
I think a lot of data teams view the dashboard as the deliverable. They view it as, I built a beautiful dashboard, I succeeded, I am great at data. If that is your thought, that is not correct. And like, you have, like, as the market tightens, like people are going to look and be like, what is the value that's being created here? And I think the back and forth you just showed of what do you want? It's like, what dashboard do you? It's like, no, they don't care.
Yeah,
They
they
care about
don't
how to
care at
increase
all.
checkouts. So like when I think about going to someone with a dashboard, you don't go to them with the dashboard. You go to them and say, hey, if I was in your shoes trying to increase checkouts, I would do this. Not, I'm going to build you a dashboard. It's literally, I believe this is what we should do. If tomorrow you went on vacation for 2 months and me, the data person, I stepped in to become the head of ecom and my job was trying to increase our checkout conversion rates, what would you do? That's the, if you can talk at that level, and if you don't know what you would do, that's the goal of the conversation. The goal of the conversation with the stakeholder is a shared understanding of the problem and the information, not a dashboard. The dashboard is a way of communicating things in a more standard way, but like your goal with them is to figure out, okay, great, what are we going to do about this? Not how am I going to present it on a dashboard and like get upset if you don't like my dashboard. It's what are we going to do to, like in this chart, it's like, okay, we are going to send a third follow-up. We know that the third follow-up is what's actually going to happen here. Or like we had something similar to this of checkout page, and we're like, what can we do to make more people that find our login page log in? And like that's a crazy conversion point, but it's like there's stuff you can do. Again, you can check online for products that entirely focus on that, because products entirely focus on that. You can ask AI, but what you'll find out is like you can show testimonials. It's like, hey, this person happily just bought the exact same thing you did. Like, check out how happy they are about it. Or like some benefit of them signing up in that moment. It's like booking.com. I don't know if you spent any time on their website. They're like 12 people are looking at the same thing you are. Like that might be too far for most companies, but it's like, what are you going to actually do to increase that conversion rate? Think in terms of that, not in terms of, oh, my dashboard's perfect. If you think about the end of your job as a dashboard, you're always going to be viewed as an operational team that sits in the back of the company, not as a high value, high impact contributor to the business.
Yeah, and if you know what to do, like you're just so much more valuable. And that's something that like I think a lot of people underestimate is they're like, oh, everyone knows what to do with this number. And you're like, no, they don't. Like you've got to tell the story around it. And then you can have the ideas of like, okay, we expected our checkout to be, or we expected our, like for your example, like our signups to be at 10% and they're currently at 1%. Okay, there's a bajillion things to do. Like you could do a million things. You could be like, we need to make it purple. We need to make it red. We need to add a button over here. We need to add like, but that's where like the ideation and the marketing like muscle comes into play. And so like now you have the least amount of information. Like you put all these numbers on the thing, and then you can add a buy question of like, okay, let's break this down by like organic traffic versus like LinkedIn traffic. Like, is there a difference? Does it matter? And can we change the outcome if there is, right? Like, hey, organic is coming in and we're asking for too much up front. And we need to just ask them to like, hey, download our white paper about how we're different than everybody else in the market, right? Like that's what you do for organic traffic, whereas something else for LinkedIn might just be like, we need to sign them up and get them in the product ASAP. And so that's where like you now have the minimum amount of things to then act. And so the last step here is in simplify your visual clutter is as your knowledge increases by listening to people like Ethan, your dashboard sophistication will tend to increase because you're now having like, oh, we need to also have the checkout. Like, was the button blue or was the button red at this point in time? Like your dashboard will get overly complex. We try to measure everything and put it all in a report, right? It's going to get overly complex. So you want to try and keep that as simple as possible so that you can have to know what to do next. And so here's some examples if anybody wants to check them out. Like visionlabs.com/demo is our actual data that we put out there. We have resources around there. And then we also have like a bunch of demos around different verticals like SEO and everything else like that. And so like that's a good place to start. I will say this disclosure that I like to put out for templates is templates are great for you to get started. They're a great thing to be like, what was this person thinking about? But if you copy a template by default, you don't know what they were trying to achieve in that moment, right? And so try to, like Ethan's point, is tie the business objective back to what you're reporting on. And so you know what to do, because a lot of templates will be like, oh, hey, we're trending impressions or our click-through rate or whatever else. And you're like, cool, like now what? And that's what you then have this dashboard conversation back and forth of like, now what? I did it. What do you want? Oh, I did it. What do you want? And you're like, what's like, where's the disconnect? And that's oftentimes where templates happen. Like again, this is our kind of like marketing template because it's built off of the questions that I've asked where I'm like, okay, how many sessions do we have? Which leads are people seeing? Which lead management are people opting into? Like, do we have like a better funnel of that? This is like meant for us. And I would say, don't copy it if you don't know what to do with these. If I know if our conversion rate, for example, is 8% for one thing, I'm like, oh shoot, like we forgot to do something that's like actually tying those things together. So that's my like little disclosure on templates there. Here's another example, right? Keeping things like really simple where you have different lead names and you have the different steps that people are going through. And you can say, hey, should this be at a higher rate or a lower rate? Do we need to put any effort behind this? We did the red, yellow, green here, but you can see where the drop-offs are at each individual step where people who are engaging with your lead magnets might not be generating those leads because they don't understand what the value is, right? They're reading it, they're trying to understand, and you just missed it. And so those are different ways you can do this. And the visuals is a whole other conversation, but you can take a look at that. My favorite example here is a 404 errors, something that everyone has, right? But you usually have to have it like, hey, how many occurred, right? And is it trending in the right direction or wrong direction? And does it still exist, right? That's basically it, right? Like, how do people get there? Do we still have them happening? And did we already solve this? Like, and that's pretty much what you got to do. And it's universal, right? And so that's something that like you can kind of start with of like, if you just didn't see this and built a 404 error monitor, like that's a very simple way to start of like, it's a very common function. How do you then make that the most useful way possible? So that's the like little framework thing here, Ethan. I ran through this. We kind of had some discourse on it. I would love if there's anybody here who has questions, or Ethan, if you have questions, like let's go for it. Like, oh, one last thing, just anybody who wants to, sorry, I forgot I even had this. We built this free tool, reviewmydashboard.com. You can take a screenshot of your dashboard and upload it. It uses the Vision API from good old API things, and then reads the visuals and runs it through like a giant, like a series of steps to then run it like best UX and UI principles around like, is it clear? And then we'll give you feedback on that, totally free. There's only one follow-up email, and then you'll never hear from me again unless you want to. But that's reviewmydashboard.com, and you can like take screenshots of your dashboards, do like a battle test there. So that's it, folks. Questions, comments, concerns. Oh, last thing, Ethan. If you have chats, questions, ask them in the chat. But Ethan, any final words or thoughts around anything here?
I could talk about this for hours. I think it kind of reminded me. So the other thing to just have on your radar, I always recommend minimize the number of dashboards you actually have. I tend to recommend 5 to 10 for a company because if it forces you to figure out the really, really important stuff.
And how many pages are in a dashboard? Like in your mind, when you say a dashboard, like how many tabs or pages are you thinking are in a dashboard?
So the way I run our company and the way I recommend this to most people is actually one effectively application with 5 to 10 tabs. Each tab represents a metric for your business. Each metric then has some bar charts and tables and stuff to actually drill down into it. But it's really, to your point earlier of like, how many signups do we have by day, conversion rate, sign up, whatever. Like, what are the top 5 to 10 things that your leadership team actually cares about and that you should use to run the business? And then a drill down for each of those, limit it to 5 to 10 for the company. And I know that sounds crazy, and people are like, as the company gets bigger, we need to have more. But it's like, what I'm trying to communicate to people is prioritization really matters. And if you pick the wrong 5, or you build 50 and 80% of them are garbage, don't waste your time on the 80%. We like focus it on finding the top 5. If you spend all of your time finding the highest value stuff, and then just doubling down on the high value stuff, you'll impact the business so much more. The only other idea that came to mind as you were talking through the review my dashboard and just given some conversations I'm having right now is, have you ever seen those like employee review? I forget what they're called, where it's like where you have some third party go interview all the people you work with and give you feedback on what you do. I forget what it's called. It's like a 360 review.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
You as an employee. I honestly think, and a lot of people engage consultants for this, but like you can honestly just go find anyone inside of your business to do it. I would have a disinterested third party inside of your company go to your leadership team. If you run a data team, have a disinterested party inside your company or outside your company. Go to your leadership team and executive stakeholders and be like, hey, I'm working on behalf of JJ. I'm just trying to summarize like what that we've built as a data, what that he has built as a data team do you actually use every day? Like what is absolutely critical? If you're not using the stuff JJ built, what are you using to run your business? So that I think it's a lot of data teams go into the conversation with the CMO or CRO or whatever, being like, oh, is this what you want? And like at some point the CMO or CRO is like, yeah, you killed it. Great. Like see you next quarter. And like they won't give you blunt feedback, being like, nah, like I don't actually look at this at all. So like if you can find a way to get someone else to go do that, you'd be shocked at how much of the stuff you built isn't being used, and delete it and refocus yourself on the stuff that is, and refocus yourself on how you actually help those people. Because if you're focused on if you're focused on steps 2 through 9, or I forgot how many numbers you had in there, JJ. If you get step 1 wrong, everything else is a waste of your time. And you need to like, I would spend 90% of your time on step 1 here and 10% on the rest. And every month, every quarter, reevaluate step 1 because it changes for your business. And if you don't stay up to date on what is important inside of your business, you're wasting all of your time.
And I think the cheat code to that, like if you want, like if you stay this long, the biggest cheat code to that is profit. Use profit as the number and then go backwards from there. And like that will give you like no one's going to argue with that. Like you might be like going too far downstream, but if you like profit per client, profit per task, profit per user, profit per thing, like that usually is a great place to like wow people. It's very complicated to do. Like it's a very hard thing to do, but like usually profit is the thing that most companies are shooting for unless they're like venture backed, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yep.
But that will usually like profit or revenue is like a great starting point because you can ask those buy questions of like, oh, by like revenue by lead entry point. Like, is that helpful or not helpful? Revenue by product they bought, right? Like there's all those different types of things you can do. And it becomes more and more helpful the longer you work on it.
Yes and no. Yes, because everyone inside of a company should be generally working towards profit. But the other 2 places to look are if you can get your hands on a redacted or full version of a board deck that is typically the CEO and leadership team's top priorities being communicated to the board or investors. That's one place. If it's a publicly traded company, read the 10Ks and the 10Qs of like what the company says are the biggest problems. And then within the exec team, like strategy teams and finance teams tend to have a very good pulse on what everyone on the leadership team cares about. Strategy functions, when they are run well, are tasked with helping to allocate resources globally across the company, and same with finance teams. So if you go become friends with the CFO, you don't have to go be like, hey, show me the FP&A spreadsheet. Just go to them and be like, what is the top priority for the marketing team right now? Like, what are they investing money into? What are they trying to drive as a metric? Right, like sales team. Like, what is the sales team's objective over the next 12 months? How are they investing to make it happen? And what are you tracking to make sure it's working? Like like they have spreadsheets for this, and they allocate huge amounts of money based on it. Go ask them for the answers, and then double check the answers are correct, and then double check again before you write any SQL statement, and then every month recheck again because it changed.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's also a great way to start. So, guys, hopefully this has been helpful. At least giving you some context of like saying, hey, how do we make this the most helpful thing, and how do you make your reporting super useful, and the conversations around it. If anybody has any questions, just shoot me an email and whatever you registered and hit reply. And if it's for Ethan, I'll forward it to him and get his response. If you're like, hey, how do you do this thing that he talked about, I will make sure to get you a prompt response. So, Ethan, it's been a blast. Thanks so much for joining. And if anybody else has any questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you guys around the internet.
Awesome. Absolute pleasure.
Hey, thank you. Bye.
Bye.